The pixels on my primary monitor froze mid-synergy. My voice, which had been confidently weaving a tapestry of corporate buzzwords for our biggest client, was suddenly echoing in a dead room. The 12 faces of the stakeholders, once nodding along to my brilliant exposition on the Flibber-to-Gibbet protocol, were now a static digital mosaic of confusion and mild irritation. The little green dot on my webcam blinked out. Then the icon appeared, the two little disconnected plugs, the digital tombstone, the harbinger of every remote worker's most primal fear. No internet connection. My meticulously crafted world of seamless data flow and corporate conquest collapsed into a silent, pixelated void. "No," I whispered, my voice cracking. "No, no, no." I slammed a fist on my oak veneer desk, rattling a precarious tower of energy drink cans. One tipped over, spilling a sticky, neon yellow puddle that began to creep ominously toward my keyboard. I ignored it. This was bigger than a simple spill. This was an extinction-level event. I cycled through the 5 stages of tech grief with the speed of a microprocessor. Denial. I frantically clicked my mouse, as if that would somehow coax the internet back into existence. I unplugged the router, waited the sacred 10 seconds, and plugged it back in, whispering a small prayer to the patron saints of bandwidth, Saint Isidore and, well, probably Bill Gates. The lights blinked amber, mocking me. Anger. A string of curses left my mouth that would have made a sailor blush, and a software engineer nod in solemn understanding. I directed my rage at the blinking amber light, at the universe, and specifically at my internet service provider, Connectisphere, whose name promised a global connection, but whose service often felt like 2 tin cans and a string. Bargaining. "Okay," I said to the empty room, my hands clasped in supplication. "Get me back online in the next 30 seconds, and I swear I will finally clean my keyboard. I'll even use the compressed air and everything. I'll floss. I'll call my mother." Depression. I slumped in my ergonomic chair, the one that cost more than my first car. Months of work, a career-defining presentation, all vaporized. My Slack icon was a sad, grayed-out hashtag. My email was a ghost town. I was an island, a digital castaway in a sea of offline despair. Acceptance. With a heavy sigh, I pushed myself away from the desk. There was only one thing left to do. I had to go. Outside. My cat, a fluffy Maine Coon named Router, because he's a central point of connection for all the affection in the house, looked up at me from his sunbeam, blinked slowly, and let out a small, questioning meow. "I know, buddy," I muttered, grabbing a hoodie. "It's a scary world out there. There are things. And people." Just 3 months prior, outside had seemed like a pretty good deal. I'd finally done it. I'd escaped the endless cycle of renting apartments with paper-thin walls and mysterious plumbing noises. I'd sunk my life savings and a terrifyingly large loan into a slice of the American dream, a 2-story colonial in a neighborhood called Tranquility Estates. On Zillow, it was paradise. Perfectly manicured lawns, identical mailboxes standing in stoic uniformity, and streets so clean you could probably eat off them, though I was sure that was against a rule somewhere. And the crown jewel, the reason I'd outbid 3 other desperate millennials, was the promise of gigabit fiber internet. A direct, pure, unadulterated data pipeline straight into my digital command center. It was the modern equivalent of striking oil. At the closing, a cheerful real estate agent had handed me a stack of papers the size of a small country's tax code. Buried within it was a thick, spiral-bound manifesto titled The Tranquility Estates Homeowners Association Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. I'd laughed, made a joke about it being light reading, and promptly used it to level out a wobbly leg on my third monitor stand. What could be so bad? Rules about lawn length and the color of your trash cans? It all seemed so quaint, so charmingly suburban. I was a quiet, tech-savvy professional. My idea of a wild Friday night was overclocking my new graphics card. I was the perfect neighbor. I wouldn't cause any trouble. Oh, the sweet, naive optimism of the recent homebuyer. I stepped out onto my perfectly manicured porch and was hit by the oppressive silence of a weekday afternoon in the suburbs. The only sound was the gentle snip, snip, snip from the property line. I followed the sleek, black fiber optic cable as it ran from the side of my house along the base of the fence. My eyes traced its path straight to the source of the sound. And there she was. She was a woman in her late 50s, though she carried herself with the ageless authority of a Roman senator. Her blonde hair was sculpted into a severe, aerodynamic bob that looked like it could deflect small arms fire. She wore pristine white capri pants, a pastel pink polo shirt, and immaculate gardening gloves. She was meticulously trimming a row of prize-winning roses that lined the fence between our properties, her movements precise and ruthless. Every snip was a final judgment on an imperfect leaf or an errant stem. This was Carol Jenkins, the woman who, during my move-in week, had introduced herself not by name, but by title. "I'm the president of the HOA. I trust you've read the binder." She looked up as I approached, her eyes the color of a faded sky, narrowing slightly. A polite smile was fixed on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile that had seen 1,000 bylaw infractions and forgiven none of them. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice as crisp as a freshly printed violation notice. "Something wrong with your wiring?" She said the word wiring with the same subtle disgust one might use for sewage leak or termite infestation. "Morning, Carol," I said, trying to keep my tone light and neighborly. I was still reeling from my presentation apocalypse and wasn't in the mood for a diplomatic incident. "Yeah, my internet just completely died. In the middle of the most important meeting of my career, naturally. Just checking the line." I pointed to the thin black suede cable at her feet. "It's brand new fiber optic, pretty high-tech stuff." Her smile tightened by a millimeter. "Is it?" She gestured vaguely with her shears. "The covenants are quite clear about visible cabling. Section 4, subsection B, paragraph 3. It constitutes an aesthetic blight on the community's shared visual space." I stared at her. A shared visual space? It was a half-inch thick cable running along the bottom of a fence. You'd need a magnifying glass and a surveyor's license to even notice it. "Right. Well, the Connectosphere guys just installed it last week. They said it was standard procedure before they can send a crew to bury it." I forced a chuckle. "You know how these big companies are?" Carol was not amused. She didn't chuckle back. I don't think she was physically capable of it. She pulled a small, leather-bound notebook and a gold-plated pen from a pocket in her gardening apron. It was the kind of accessory a Bond villain would use to jot down world domination plans. She made a neat, precise note. "Connectosphere," she murmured, tasting the name. "I'll have to look into their community installation standards. Regardless, the responsibility falls upon the homeowner to ensure compliance. I trust you'll be addressing this blight promptly." She gave the fiber optic cable a look of such profound loathing, I was half surprised it didn't curl up and wither on the spot. "Yes, of course," I said, already backing away. "Top of my list. Right after I figure out why my entire digital life has ceased to exist." She gave a curt nod and returned to her roses, delivering a final, brutal snip to a perfectly healthy-looking bud. As I walked back to my house, the dead amber light on my router flashing in my mind's eye, I had the distinct and sinking feeling that my problems were just beginning. The shared visual space, it seemed, was about to become a battleground. The next few weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare, fought not with guns and bombs, but with laminated paper and passive-aggressive pleasantries. Carol, it turned out, was not just the HOA president. She was its grand inquisitor, its ever-vigilant sentinel against the creeping forces of aesthetic decay. My existence seemed to be a personal affront to her vision of suburban perfection. The violation notices started appearing, taped to my front door with an unnerving precision. They weren't just slipped under the mat. They were affixed with 2 perfectly parallel strips of Scotch tape, always at eye level. The first one was for improper lawn height. Attached to the letter, which cited Section 7, Paragraph A, was a color photograph of my lawn. A ruler was stuck deep into the turf, the image zoomed in to show the grass blades shamelessly exceeding the mandated 3-inch height by at least 1/4 of an inch. A handwritten note in elegant cursive at the bottom read, "A tidy lawn reflects a tidy mind. Let's all do our part." I spent that Saturday pushing a lawnmower in a haze of indignant fury, muttering to myself about the fine line between civic duty and outright lunacy. The second notice came a week later. Unauthorized holiday decorations. The offense? A single medium-sized pumpkin I had forgotten on my porch. It was November 8th. According to the bylaws, Section 12, subsection D, all seasonal decorations had to be removed within 5 days of the corresponding holiday. While we all appreciate festive spirit, her note read, timeliness is next to godliness in tranquility estates. I disposed of the offending gourd as if it were radioactive waste. The third one was the masterpiece. Suspected unregistered commercial enterprise. This one had no photo, just a chillingly vague accusation. The volume of commercial package deliveries to your residence, the letter stated, is inconsistent with the zoning for a single-family dwelling. Please be reminded that all home businesses must be registered and approved by the Architectural Review Committee. I read it 3 times. My unregistered commercial enterprise was my addiction to Amazon Prime and a monthly subscription box for exotic jerky. I pictured Carol, hiding in her meticulously pruned hedges, a clipboard in hand, logging every Amazon driver, every FedEx truck, as if she were a Cold War spy tracking enemy movements. I vented my frustrations to the only person who would listen without judgment, Router, my cat. He was perched on the back of the sofa, grooming himself with a dignified air. "She's counting my packages, Router," I said, waving the letter. "She's timing my holiday decor. She's measuring the grass. This isn't a neighborhood, it's a minimum security prison with better landscaping. What's next? A fine for breathing too loudly? A citation for improperly aligned throw pillows?" Router paused his grooming, looked at me, and let out a soft chirp which I interpreted as, "Well, the pillows are a bit chaotic." I knew I had to be proactive. The visible fiber optic cable was the original sin, the source of all this newfound scrutiny. I had to get it buried. I prepared myself for the ordeal, cracking my knuckles and taking a deep, fortifying breath before dialing the number for Connectosphere. The experience was everything I expected, and worse. I navigated an automated phone tree so complex it must have been designed by M.C. Escher. I was subjected to a smooth jazz rendition of Don't Stop Believin' that seemed to stretch into infinity. After 45 minutes of my life that I would never get back, I was finally connected to a human being. I explained the situation, emphasizing the urgency and the passionate nature of my HOA president. The customer service representative listened with an air of profound indifference, and then, after a series of loud, deliberate keyboard clicks, delivered the verdict. "Okay, Mr. Miller," he said, mispronouncing my name despite me having spelled it out twice. "We can get a trenching crew out to you. The earliest available appointment we have is on the 28th. I checked my calendar. The 28th was 3 weeks away. 3 more weeks of living under Carol's microscope. 3 more weeks of potential violations. It was a death sentence. "Is there anything sooner?" I pleaded. "Anything at all. You don't understand. The woman next door has a clipboard and she's not afraid to use it." A sigh crackled down the line. "Sir, that's the earliest slot. We're booking into the holidays. You're welcome to check back for cancellations." Defeated, I accepted the appointment. At least it was a date. A concrete piece of evidence I could present to my tormentor. Armed with my confirmation email printed out like a sacred text, I went to seek an audience with the Queen. I found her patrolling the sidewalk, her gait that of a general reviewing her troops. I approached her with the cautious deference one might offer a sleeping bear. "Carol, good news," I began, forcing a cheerful tone. I held up the printed email. "I got the appointment scheduled with Connectisphere to get the cable buried. It's on the 28th. She stopped and took the paper from me, holding it at a distance as if it were contaminated. She read the date, and her face, already a mask of stern disapproval, somehow hardened further. "The 28th, she said, handing the paper back. "That's nearly 3 weeks from now. That is unacceptable. The bylaws require immediate compliance for aesthetic infractions." I felt a nerve in my temple begin to throb. Immediate? Carol, it's a fiber optic cable, not a rogue weed. They're professionals, they have a schedule. I can't just go out there with a shovel myself. I'd probably hit a gas line or sever the main water pipe for the whole block. I tried a weak laugh. That would be a real aesthetic blight, wouldn't it? Her expression didn't change. That sounds like a you problem, Alex. Your lack of foresight in arranging this installation is not the community's burden to bear. If you can't respect the rules of this community, she said, her voice dropping to a low, chillingly calm register, then perhaps you are not a good fit for Tranquility Estates. It was the quiet threat underneath, the suggestion that I, the homeowner, was somehow a guest on probation, that finally made something in me snap. You know what, Carol? It's a cable. A thin, black cable that provides me with the ability to do my job and pay the mortgage on this house, which in turn pays the HOA fees that fund your little reign of terror. It will be buried on the 28th. That's the best I can do. I had raised my voice. It was a tactical error. Carol's eyes widened, not with anger, but with a kind of triumphant vindication. She had pushed me, and I had cracked. She had won. She gave me a slow, deliberate nod. I see, she said. She then delivered her ultimatum, each word a perfectly polished stone of menace. Either that unsightly cable is gone by the end of the week, or I will take the necessary measures to have it removed myself. She paused, then added with a devastating finality, Have a blessed day. She turned on her heel and walked away, her back ramrod straight, leaving me fuming on the sidewalk. The war of notices was over. It was about to get physical Friday night. The end of a long, stressful week spent nervously glancing out my window, half expecting to see Carol advancing on my property with a pair of hedge clippers and a look of grim determination. To blow off steam, I'd immersed myself in the digital world, where I was king. My friends and I were deep in a siege match, the stakes high, the banter flying faster than the virtual bullets. My 3-monitor setup bathed the room in a tactical glow. On my left screen, our team's Discord chat was a waterfall of frantic callouts. On the right, a map of the level. And in the center, the glorious, high-definition chaos of the game itself. We were on the verge of clutching the final round. Alex, left flank, "There's a sniper on the roof of the consulate," screamed my friend Dave through the headset. "I see him," I replied, my voice calm, my fingers dancing across the keyboard. My virtual operator slid into cover behind a marble pillar. I zoomed in with my scope, the crosshairs settling on a distant, pixelated head. "Say hello to my little friend Click. It wasn't a sound in the game. It was a sound in my headphones. The sound of the world ending. The screen froze. Dave's voice, mid-scream, dissolved into a garbled electronic squawk. And then, silence. The glorious, high-definition chaos was replaced by a familiar, dreaded enemy. The no internet connection icon. But this was different from the last time. There was no flicker, no stuttering prelude. It was an instant, surgical severance. It felt deliberate, malicious. "No, she didn't," I whispered, ripping my headset off. I didn't bother with the router this time. I knew this wasn't an ISP issue. I sprinted from my chair, nearly tripping over a stunned Router the cat, and bolted for the front door. I burst outside into the cool evening air. The sun had just set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a beautiful backdrop for the ugly scene that was unfolding. The street was quiet, the only sound the chirping of crickets. And there, standing by the utility junction box on the edge of my property, was Carol. She was illuminated by the soft glow of a solar-powered garden light, giving her a strangely theatrical appearance. In her right hand, she held a pair of large, heavy-duty garden shears, the kind you use for thick branches, not delicate roses. A triumphant, satisfied gleam shone in her eyes. And at her feet, lying in the perfectly manicured grass, was the severed end of my beautiful, life-giving fiber optic cable. Its clean, black cross-section stared up at the sky like a dead eye. She had done it. The madwoman had actually done it. I stood there, frozen on my porch, a strange calm washing over my initial rage. It was the calm of pure, unadulterated disbelief. You cut my internet cable," I finally managed to stammer, my voice a hoarse whisper. "With garden shears?" Carol looked up at me, a smug little smile playing on her lips. She held up the shears as if presenting an award. "I warned you, Alex," she said, her voice dripping with self-satisfaction. "The rules are the rules. It was an eyesore." She gestured to the now invisible offense. "Now it's not. Problem solved." For a moment, I was speechless. I just stared at her, at the shears, at the butchered cable. Problem solved? She hadn't just solved a problem. She had opened Pandora's box with a pair of Fiskars. My rage returned, hot and volcanic. "Carol, are you insane? That's destruction of property. That's a federal offense, I think. You can't just cut utility lines." She scoffed, a sound like tearing cardboard. "Don't be dramatic. It's a simple television wire. I did this community a service. Now, if you'll excuse me, my hydrangeas need watering." She turned to walk back to her pristine home, her work done, her sense of order restored. She was leaving me in the digital dark ages, all for the sake of her twisted suburban aesthetics. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers shaking with adrenaline. "Oh, no you don't. You're not going anywhere." My thumb hovered over the 911 button, but I paused. First things first. I needed to call the ISP. I needed to report this, to get a technician out here, to start the clock on the bill I was going to metaphorically, and perhaps literally, staple to Carol's forehead. I dialed the emergency support number for Connectisphere. I was about to set in motion a chain of events that would shatter the tranquility of Tranquility Estates forever. And Carol, blissfully unaware, was about to find out what happens when you snip the wrong thread in the fabric of the modern world. "Connectisphere emergency support. This is Dave. How can I help you? The voice on the other end was weary, bored, the voice of a man who had heard every possible technological sob story. Hi, Dave, I said, my voice tight. My internet cable has been maliciously severed. Okay, sir. Vandalism, Dave droned, followed by the clacking of a keyboard. We can get a technician out to you. Looks like the earliest available slot is next Tuesday between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. Tuesday, I almost screamed into the phone. Tuesday? No, Dave, you don't understand. A woman cut it. My neighbor, the HOA president. She cut it with garden shears 10 feet from my face. This is a declaration of war. I need someone here now. There was a long-suffering sigh on the other end. Sir, I understand you're frustrated, but we can't just dispatch a technician on demand. There's a protocol. Is there a protocol for a crazy lady with gardening tools committing a felony? I shot back. Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down, Dave said, his voice taking on the placating tone reserved for toddlers and lunatics. I need the serial number off the utility box so I can log the ticket properly. Fine, I snapped. I knelt by the box, my phone's flashlight illuminating the small metal plate. I read the series of letters and numbers to him. It's FOTLH3X97B. A long pause stretched on the other end of the line. The only sound was the faint hum of the phone. The clacking of the keyboard stopped. The bored, weary tone in Dave's voice vanished, replaced by something else. Alarm. Sir, Dave said, his voice now an octave higher and several degrees more alert. Can you repeat that address and that serial number for me, please? Slowly? A cold knot began to form in my stomach. This was not the standard ISP runaround. This was different. I repeated the address and the serial number, my voice wavering slightly. I could hear frantic typing now, faster and more aggressive than before. Then I heard a muffled voice in the background. Get Sheila on the line, now. Sir, please hold, Dave said, his voice strained. The terrible, smooth jazz hold music didn't come back on. It was just dead, tense silence. My heart started to pound against my ribs. What had she done? After 30 seconds that felt like an hour, a new voice came on the line. It was a woman's voice, crisp, authoritative, and utterly devoid of fluff. Mr. Miller, my name is Sheila. I'm the shift supervisor at the Network Operations Command Center. I need you to confirm your physical location for me. Are you currently at 123 Maple Lane in Tranquility Estates? Yes, I am, I said, my own alarm rising to meet hers. Is there a problem? I mean, besides my fortnight career being over and my neighbor committing acts of domestic terrorism against my bandwidth? Sheila ignored my attempt at humor. Her voice was flat and serious. Sir, I need you to listen to me very carefully. That line your neighbor cut, that isn't just your residential service line. She paused, and in that pause, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. You're tapped into the H3 redundant fiber optic trunk line, Sheila continued, her words precise and heavy. Sir, that line provides primary data services and VoIP communications to St. Jude's General Hospital, Mercy Medical Center, and the Pine County Pediatric Hospital. The crickets suddenly sounded very loud. The cool evening air felt frigid. The blood drained from my face. St. Jude's, Mercy Medical, the Pediatric Hospital. My gaze drifted across the lawn to Carol's house. The lights were on. I could see her silhouette moving around in her kitchen, probably putting her murder weapon away and brewing a cup of chamomile tea. She was completely, blissfully unaware that she hadn't just disconnected a gamer from his server. She had cut a hospital's lifeline. Sheila, I whispered into the phone. What's going to happen now? Now, Mr. Miller, she replied, her voice grim. I'm dispatching our Tier 1 critical response unit to your location. Their ETA is 15 minutes. The local authorities have also been notified. Do not touch the cable. Do not approach your neighbor. Just stay where you are." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling. I looked at the severed cable, then at Carol's house, then up at the darkening sky. The tranquility of Tranquility Estates had just been officially, spectacularly, and catastrophically shattered. And I had a front row seat. The first to arrive was not a subtle presence. A huge, heavy-duty Connectisphere utility truck, the kind you usually see working on major highways, thundered down our quiet suburban street and screeched to a halt in front of my house. Its yellow hazard lights began to strobe, casting long, frantic beams across the perfectly manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. The effect was apocalyptic. Curtains began to twitch in windows up and down the block. A man who looked like he was carved from a block of granite and seasoned with decades of cynicism hopped out of the driver's side. He wore a grease-stained jumpsuit and a world-weary expression. This had to be the Tier 1 critical response. He took one look at me standing dumbly on my lawn, then at the neatly severed cable, and let out a low, impressive whistle. "Holy mother of bandwidth," he grunted, his voice a gravelly rumble. He knelt down, inspecting the cut with the eye of a seasoned detective examining a body. "She used shears? Like for roses?" This was Sal. I didn't know it yet, but Sal was about to become my spirit guide through this bizarre techno-tragedy. Before I could answer, the night was split by a familiar sound. A police siren. 2 cruisers from the Pine County Sheriff's Department swung onto Maple Lane, their red and blue lights joining the chaotic ballet of the yellow strobes. They parked at opposing angles, sealing off the street. A stern, no-nonsense officer with a chiseled jaw and a name tag that read Miller stepped out of the first car. His eyes swept the scene, taking in the utility truck, me in my gaming hoodie and pajama pants, and the blinking lights painting everything in surreal colors. His gaze finally settled on Carol's house, where a light had just flicked on in the front window. "Are you the one who called this in?" Officer Miller asked, his voice calm but firm. "Technically, the Connectisphere Network Operations Command Center called you," I explained. "But I'm the one whose internet got murdered. She did it." I pointed an accusatory finger toward Carol's house. "With garden shears." Officer Miller's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, disbelief, amusement, passed through his eyes. "Okay, son, let me get this straight. You're telling me that this woman," he gestured with his chin towards the house, "cut this here cable because it was aesthetically unpleasing." "That is the long and the very, very short of it, officer," I confirmed. "She's extremely passionate about the HOA bylaws. Said it was an eyesore." Sal, the technician, stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. He addressed the officer with a gravity that immediately captured his attention. "Officer, with all due respect, this ain't just some kid's cable TV. This is a Tier 1 critical infrastructure failure. That's an FCC designation. I've already pinged our corporate legal and the regional commission liaison. This is way, way above my pay grade." Officer Miller's professional demeanor hardened. "Critical infrastructure," he repeated, the words hanging in the air. As if summoned by the phrase, a new vehicle arrived. It wasn't a truck or a cruiser. It was a sleek, black German sedan that whispered to a stop behind the police cars. It was so out of place in our humble cul-de-sac that it might as well have been a spaceship. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. She wore a razor-sharp charcoal business suit and a pair of heels that looked like they could puncture sheet metal. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her face was set in a mask of expensive, weaponized competence. She moved with a purpose that made everyone else look like they were standing still. This was a predator, and our little suburban Serengeti was her new hunting ground. She completely ignored me and Sal, marching directly to Officer Miller. "Officer, I'm Jessica Davenport, Senior Counsel for Connectisphere." Her voice was like ice. "Is the perpetrator on site?" Just then, the front door of Carol's house opened. Carol herself stepped out onto her porch, clad in a fluffy pink bathrobe, a mug in her hand. She squinted into the flashing lights, an expression of pure annoyance on her face. The commotion was clearly disturbing her evening routine. "What on earth is all this racket?" she called out, her voice sharp with indignation. "This is a quiet zone after 9 p.m. It's in the bylaws." Miss Davenport's head snapped in Carol's direction. Her eyes narrowed. She had found her target. Without waiting for the officer, she strode across my lawn and onto Carol's, her heels sinking slightly into the perfect turf, an infraction that on any other day would have earned me a violation notice. "Are you Carol Jenkins?" Miss Davenport asked, her voice dangerously calm as she stopped at the foot of Carol's porch steps. Carol puffed up her chest, feeling her authority challenged. "I am. I am the president of this homeowners association, and this is a gross, frankly hysterical overreaction to a simple bylaw enforcement action." Miss Davenport allowed a small, cold smile to touch her lips. "Ma'am, your bylaw enforcement action has just intentionally and maliciously severed a dedicated fiber optic trunk line. The preliminary, on-the-spot estimate for the emergency splice and repair of the physical damage is approximately $80,000. Carol's jaw went slack. The mug in her hand trembled. $80,000? That's ridiculous. For a television wire? That figure does not include any service interruption penalties or potential civil damages from our clients for breach of contract," Miss Davenport continued, her voice relentless. "We will, of course, be seeking full and immediate restitution. We will also be pursuing criminal charges to the fullest extent of the law." As the figure $80,000 echoed in the night, another car pulled up, this one a modest sedan with a small logo on the side. St. Jude's General Hospital. A man in rumpled hospital scrubs and a frantic expression jumped out and jogged over to the assembled group. "I'm Mr. Chen, the on-call administrator from St. Jude's," he said, breathless. He pointed a shaking finger at the severed cable. "Is that it? Is that why everything is down?" He turned to Officer Miller, his voice cracking with stress. "Officer, our entire electronic health record system is offline. We can't access digital patient charts. Our scheduling system for the surgical suites is down. Our on-call paging network, which coordinates the entire emergency response team, is routed through our VoIP network. We had to postpone a non-critical but time-sensitive organ transplant procedure because the coordinating surgeon couldn't be reached reliably." Every single person in the vicinity, me, Sal, Officer Miller, even the stone-faced Miss Davenport, turned to stare at Carol. The color drained from her face, leaving it a pasty ghost white. The smugness, the indignation, the righteous authority. It all evaporated in an instant, replaced by a dawning, abject horror. She finally understood. She hadn't just trimmed an unsightly wire. She hadn't just violated a city ordinance. She had silenced a hospital. The ceramic mug slipped from her grasp. It shattered on her pristine brick porch, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden, terrible silence. The word transplant hung in the air, a devastating indictment. Carol's mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. The HOA Queen, the guardian of aesthetics, the enforcer of rules, had finally met a rule she couldn't bend, a consequence she couldn't possibly comprehend. My street, once a monument to suburban ennui, had transformed into the bustling nerve center of a major disaster recovery operation. The single utility truck was soon joined by two more, including a massive rig with a cherry picker and what looked like a mobile laboratory on its flatbed. Sal, my new best friend and guide to this strange world, was now directing a full crew of contractors. They swarmed the area, cordoning off my lawn and carols with bright yellow caution tape, setting up portable floodlights that banished the night and bathed the entire cul-de-sac in a harsh, artificial daylight. The crew was a hilarious, blue-collar Greek chorus, providing a running commentary on the absurdity of the situation. There was Mikey, a young apprentice who was clearly more interested in documenting the HOA apocalypse for his TikTok followers than in actually working. Then there was Chunk, a large, mostly silent man who operated the heavy machinery with the surprising delicacy of a brain surgeon. I had become a permanent fixture on my own porch, a sort of bewildered liaison to the chaos. I'd made a giant pot of coffee and was doling it out to the crew, who had accepted me as one of their own. "Kid, I'm telling you," Sal said, taking a steaming mug from me. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen squirrels chew through lines so bad they caused a blackout in a whole city block. I've seen drunk drivers take out a whole junction box. I once saw a backhoe take out a substation and knock a TV station off the air during the Super Bowl." He took a long sip of coffee. "But I have never, in all my days, seen a suburban mom with a vendetta against a wire take out 3 major medical facilities with a pair of gardening shears. This is one for the history books." Mikey, phone in hand, sidled up. "No cap, this is going viral. My last video has 10,000 views. #HOA Karen versus #fiber optics. People are losing their minds in the comments. They're calling her the bandwidth bandit." The contractors got to work, and it was a fascinating spectacle. They unveiled a machine that looked like something out of a sci-fi movie, a fusion splicer. Sal explained that they had to strip back the thick outer casing of the severed cable, expose the hundreds of tiny, hair-thin glass fibers within, and then, one by one, perfectly align and melt them back together. It was a painstaking, microscopic surgery being performed in the middle of my front yard under floodlights. "Each one of those little glass strands carries a ton of data," Sal explained, pointing to the delicate bundle. "Hospital records, emails, phone calls, probably someone's Netflix stream. Your neighbor here, she didn't just cut a rope, she blew up the library." Meanwhile, the neighborhood had woken up. What started as a few twitching curtains had become a full-blown spectator sport. People emerged from their homes, drawn by the lights and the official vehicles. Neighbors I'd only ever nodded to were now gathered in hushed clumps on the sidewalk across the street. Some had even brought out lawn chairs and coolers. It was the most exciting thing to happen in Tranquility Estates since a rogue deer had gotten trapped in the community pool. The HOA faithful, who had once praised Carol's iron-fisted rule, were now looking at her house with a mixture of horror and delicious schadenfreude. I overheard snippets of conversation floating across the lawn. "Always said she took it too far." $80,000? Good Lord, there goes her retirement. An organ transplant, can you imagine? The tide of public opinion in Tranquility Estates had turned against its queen with the speed and finality of a guillotine. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any more surreal, a white van with a local news station logo pulled up. A reporter with impossibly white teeth and a microphone that looked like a black ice cream cone bounded out, a cameraman trailing her. She made a beeline for me. "Hi, Brenda Hale, Channel 8 News," she said, her voice a peppy, broadcast-ready chirp. "You're the homeowner, right? Can you tell us in your own words what happened here tonight?" I looked from the news camera to the surgical operation on my lawn, to the gathering crowd of my neighbors, to the police cars, to the shattered remains of Carol's mug on her porch. "Well, Brenda," I said, trying to sound thoughtful. "It's a cautionary tale, really. It all started with a disagreement about proper lawn aesthetics and a perceived aesthetic blight. and it somehow escalated to a potential medical crisis, tens of thousands of dollars in damages, and a major infrastructure meltdown. It's a classic story of our times, I suppose, a testament to what can happen when you give a zealot a binder full of rules and a sharp pair of gardening tools. Brenda's eyes lit up. This was gold. A binder full of rules? Can you elaborate? Before I could, the front door to Carol's house creaked open again. Carol herself emerged. She'd changed out of her bathrobe and into a sensible beige pantsuit, a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of her former authority. She saw the news camera, the crowd, the full scale of the circus her actions had created on her lawn, and something inside her, the last load-bearing pillar of her sanity, crumbled into dust. She marched down her steps, her face a mask of frantic desperation. "He's the one you should be talking to!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He wouldn't listen. He flaunted the rules. The bylaws are perfectly clear." She turned to the news camera, her eyes wide and wild. "It was unsightly, a blight. Do you have any idea what visible cabling does to property values? No one thinks about the property values. It was probably a fire hazard, too. I was protecting this community. I am the victim here." Miss Davenport, who had been quietly conferring with Officer Miller, looked over at Carol's ranting with an expression of poor, unadulterated pity. It was the look of a hawk pitying a mouse for not being smart enough to hide better. Officer Miller had clearly decided he'd seen enough. He walked calmly over to Carol, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I think you've said enough for one night. I'm going to have to ask you to put your hands behind your back." Carol stared at him, her rant cut short. "What? You're arresting me?" "Carol Jenkins," Officer Miller said, his voice becoming more formal as he produced a pair of handcuffs. "You are under arrest for felony destruction of critical infrastructure and willful disruption of public services." The metallic click of the handcuffs locking around Carol's wrists echoed through the cul-de-sac. A collective gasp went through the crowd of neighbors. The bandwidth bandit had been apprehended. As Officer Miller gently guided the now sobbing, completely broken former HOA president toward the back of his cruiser, I caught Sal's eye. He gave me a slow, solemn nod and took another sip of his coffee. The circus had reached its climax. In the days that followed, a strange peace settled over Maple Lane. The circus packed up and left. The utility trucks rumbled away, the news vans found a new story, and the neighbors retreated back into their homes, armed with a piece of gossip so potent it would sustain them for years. The only evidence of the chaotic night was a pristine new patch of sod on my lawn and a small green utility marker, now surrounded by a ring of bright yellow warning stakes, practically screaming, "Do not touch." The fiber optic cable was repaired, reinforced, and buried so deep in the earth it was probably tickling the planet's mantle. My internet was back, and it was glorious. The legal and financial fallout for Carol was, from what I could gather, apocalyptic. Miss Davenport, true to her word, had unleashed the full, terrifying power of Connectisphere's legal department. I was copied on some of the initial correspondence as a key witness. The letters were masterpieces of corporate legalese, detailing costs for emergency crew deployment, specialized equipment rentals, man-hours, and a separate, staggering bill for the breach of service penalties they had to pay to the hospitals. Then came the civil suit. It wasn't just one suit, it was a coalition. St. Jude's, Mercy Medical, and the pediatric hospital had joined forces, filing a lawsuit that cited damages for operational disruption, risk to patient safety, and the costs of implementing their emergency backup protocols. The numbers involved had so many zeros, I felt my vision blur. The Tranquility Estates HOA, in a spectacular act of self-preservation, moved faster than I'd ever seen them move on anything. They held an emergency board meeting, unanimously voted to remove Carol as president, and immediately hired a law firm to see how far they could distance themselves from her actions. They issued a public apology, printed in the local paper, and a memo to all residents clarifying that while lawn height was important, severing critical data infrastructure was, in fact, frowned upon. Carol's house went up for sale a week later. A for sale by owner sign appeared on the lawn, looking sad and desperate. The whispers were that she had to liquidate everything to cover the first wave of legal fees. Her reign was over. Her tidy, orderly world had been blown apart. My role in the whole affair had turned me into a minor local celebrity. My binder full of rules quote had made it into the news report, and I became the poster child for beleaguered homeowners everywhere. But the real reward came in a crisp white envelope from Connectisphere. It was a letter from Miss Davenport herself. It thanked me for my calm cooperation in a challenging situation. As a token of their gratitude for my role in identifying the perpetrator and to ensure my future customer loyalty, they were wiping my bill clean, forever. And they were upgrading my service. The next day, a very polite, very cautious technician came and installed what he called the prosumer package. I now had a dedicated 10 gigabit symmetrical line. My internet was so fast I could probably download the entire internet in about 5 minutes. My gaming friends were sick with envy. They no longer called me Alex. I was now the cable slayer, the fiber lord, the bringer of bandwidth. It was a heavy crown, but I wore it with pride. About a month after the incident, I was outside planting some flowers around the new, heavily fortified utility marker. It was my way of making peace with the spot. Turning a crime scene into a garden, a beat-up moving truck was parked in front of Carol's old house. I saw her, looking smaller and grayer than I remembered, loading a cardboard box filled with what looked like gardening books into the back of an old sedan. She saw me. For a moment I thought she would just get in her car and drive away. But she hesitated, then started walking slowly across the lawn toward me. Her face was a ruin of exhaustion and regret. She stopped a few feet away, avoiding my eyes, looking instead at the cheerful pansies I was planting. She started, her voice raspy. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for the trouble. I stood up, wiping the dirt from my hands. I looked at her, at the moving truck, at the sold sign now plastered across her real estate sign. I could have said 100 things. I could have yelled, I could have lectured, I could have told her about the sleepless nights and the sheer, heart-stopping terror of that evening. But revenge, I've learned, is a dish best served cold, and with a single, perfectly aimed zinger. I paused, letting the silence stretch, then gave her a small, tight, pitying smile. You know, Carol, I said, my voice quiet and conversational. The funny thing is, I had that appointment with Connectisphere to get the cable buried. It was for the following Monday morning. I shrugged. You were just a few days too early. I watched as the final, delicious piece of irony landed. I saw the understanding dawn in her eyes, the realization that all of this, the humiliation, the financial ruin, the destruction of her life, had been for nothing. It had been completely, utterly, and tragically avoidable. Her shoulders slumped in final defeat. She didn't say another word. She just turned and walked back to her car. A ghost leaving her own haunting. I went back inside my house, leaving her to her fate. I sat down at my digital command center. My 3 monitors glowed with promise. I clicked open my internet speed test. The needle shot up, hitting a number so high it seemed ludicrous. I smiled. I put on my headset and logged into the game. The familiar voices of my friends filled my ears. The Fiber Lord is here! All hail! Did you miss me? I asked, settling into my chair. The battle was over. The war was won. The bandwidth was mine. And out in my front yard, the pansies bloomed, a cheerful, colorful monument to the day the HOA went too far.